what's your reaction to this news this morning?
Well, look, it's historic, as often happens in Israel. It's been a sort of a last-minute series of dramas. Yair Lapid, the leader of the second largest party in the Knesset, had until midnight Israel time to form a new coalition, and he's done it. This new government still needs to be approved by Israel's parliament, the Knesset, which needs to reconvene and formally endorse it. But look, it's a real rainbow coalition. It's got secular liberal parties in it, religious nationalist parties, conservative parties, an Islamist party for the first time in Israel's history. And I think it's historic because it means that Bibi Netanyahu has been a strong and solid Prime Minister for Israel now for 12 years. We're obviously moving into the post-Netanyahu era. So it's a big moment for Israel's political history. Yeah.
Well, what could go wrong with an 8-faction coalition, Dave?
And a 1-seat majority.
I mean, but how secure is a country when it's so politically divided?
Look, this is almost inbuilt into Israel's political system. I mean, they've had 4 elections over the last 2 years. Historically, their prime ministers and leaders changed quite often. It's the recent era has actually been the exception rather than the norm, where you've had one prime minister in charge for such a long period. And look, Israel's, I guess, its institutions are strong. It's its public services, bureaucracy, its defence forces and its intelligence services. And unlike Australia, their main chamber is a proportional representation chamber. So it's like, if you had to govern Australia from the Senate, and the two-party system is broken down. So the inevitable result of that is sort of coalition governments, which cobble together a number of different parties. But they found a way to make it work. And look, I've got confidence that this government will might not go the full term, but it'll certainly get on and do the things Israel needs doing, like pass a budget and other essential measures.
So the two, I suppose we can call them leaders now, who are going to share it 2 years each, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, how different do you think their leadership and their leadership style will be to Benjamin Netanyahu?
Look, they'll both be quite different, and obviously the big motivation for all of these parties to get together was they wanted to move beyond the Netanyahu era. So, Lapid and Bennett, both of whom I know are passionate about Israel, great defenders of Israel and Israel's institutions, as you'd expect any Israeli politician to be. But Yair Lapid is, he's more a Tel Aviv guy, which means he's a former TV journalist. He's quite secular and liberal and modern in his outlook. Naftali Bennett is a former tech entrepreneur, served in a well-regarded unit of the IDF, but leads a party that's religious nationalist, which means it's on the more conservative end of Israeli politics. But as individuals, I mean, they actually get along very well together. When I first got to Israel in 2013, they were both in government together, in a government headed by Netanyahu. And notwithstanding the fact they lead political parties of quite different persuasions, they've always enjoyed a good personal relationship.
So you have no doubts that there will be an exchange after 2 years?
Look, you can never say you have no doubts about Israel, and 2 years is a long time in any political system, particularly in Israel. The last government that was formed with Netanyahu at the helm was meant to hand over to another leader, Benny Gantz, after 2 years.
Yes.
Of course, that didn't happen. Israel went to election. So it will really depend upon the incentives of everyone at the time. In Israel, it's not fixed terms; it's 4-year terms for the Knesset, but. And with a 1-seat majority for this new government, obviously, if any party decides it's in its interest to go to a new election and leave the government, well, the governing coalition doesn't continue. So, you hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Do you think when it comes to Gaza as well, because inevitably there'll be a flare-up again at some point down the track, will Bennett and Lapid be as strong as Netanyahu was?
I think any Israeli Prime Minister would protect Israel from rocket attacks and protect Israeli citizens from rocket attacks, and we couldn't expect otherwise. And Israel's defence establishment, if you like, is quite a powerful institution in and of itself. So, in some respects, when he's been in government, Bennett has been more hawkish than Netanyahu. Being the Prime Minister usually changes you because you have to weigh up more, other factors and international opinion and whatnot. So, I wouldn't expect it to be that different. But I would say, and I'm hopeful that. The only thing that can really bring peace between Israel and Gaza and development for the people of Gaza, which is what they sorely need, is a change in the political dispensation in Gaza. And I know Egypt, which played a key role in brokering this most recent ceasefire, wants to see that happen. And I think, if anything, the last crisis and the tragic loss of life on both sides from this conflict should teach us that we need to demand better than a restoration of the status quo. The Palestinian people deserve better, but so do the Israeli people.
Is there any chance of Netanyahu hanging on here, or is it a foregone conclusion here?
Well, look, I would sound a note of caution because they've cobbled together a coalition of 61 seats out of 120. The government is yet to be formally sort of adopted by the Knesset or the Parliament. It needs to go through a process, and until that time happens, there's always a risk, obviously, of a breakout or someone changing their mind. So I think it's more likely than not that this government will form, but there's always a chance that it could be undone at the last minute.
And just finally, what's Netanyahu's legacy?
I think he can look back with pride on a number of things. Firstly, keeping Israel safe and secure and strong, ensuring that Israel remains an advanced economy and a leading technological power in the Middle East, and contributing more broadly to a broader peace, if you like, between the Jewish people and the Arab people, because it's during his term, and with the significant help from the US administration and the Trump administration, that peace agreements have been forged between Israel and the UAE, Israel and Bahrain, Israel and Sudan, and Israel and Morocco. And this has the potential, I think, to be transformative for Israel's relations with the Arab world, just as peace agreements with Egypt in the 70s and Jordan in 1990 were. And I think it's important, and I'm sure this will happen, that any successor to Netanyahu builds upon that legacy.
Interesting stuff. All right, Dave Sharma, Liberal MP and Australia's former ambassador to Israel. As always, good to chat. Appreciate your time. Talk to you soon.
Good to talk, Peter. Thank you.